I'm so thrilled to welcome onto the first time facilitator podcast, Jo Fitzgerald. Jo, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. After being a listener for so long and hearing such great stories from people, it's just such a privilege to be part of it. So thank you so much for having me.
That's okay. And I had to invite you on after we had some great chats when you were over in Brisbane. Was it like last month or even the month before? Yeah. It's crazy how quickly time flies. Now, Jo, I've heard a lot about your career experience and the things that you bring into facilitation. And of course, no one ever sort of starts out as a facilitator. We kind of find this path by going through a bit of a career journey. And can you tell us and our listeners a bit about your story and what got you here?
Yeah, I started out, my first career was as a primary school teacher, which was the only thing actually in life I'd ever wanted to be from a small child. And I did that for a few years, and then I was shoulder tapped to come and be a facilitator for a project that a university was running with a government agency to try and help teachers teach more road safety in the curriculum. And so they wanted what they called a facilitator, which was someone who basically went and ran some workshops and worked alongside teachers. And I was very young and quite inexperienced and probably had no idea what I was doing, but did that for a couple of years, and through that got into communications in some government agencies and worked on some really, I feel really lucky to have worked on some great social change programs, trying to get people to reduce alcohol consumption and alcohol-related harm, exercise more, increase their road safety, lots of big ad campaigns and community campaigns. And then my last big gig, I guess, in government was working in Christchurch and Canterbury after the earthquakes, the quite devastating earthquakes. I was down there for 5 years as one of the senior leaders in a government agency. And throughout that, in my time, I had always had a facilitating aspect to how I like to work. I always like to work with different people. I loved hearing different people's ideas. I mean, sometimes I didn't love it because, what do we do with them? But I enjoyed that challenge. I loved the development of teams and seeing how people could come together as a leader. And so when my time in Christchurch ended, I decided to go and investigate that a bit more. I became a Gallup certified strengths coach because I loved using the strengths tool, and through that got into other facilitation. So in a way, I feel like I started in this working with children, and helping them develop. And now I'm applying in a very different way, but some of the same things that energize me about that role energizes me in this role as a facilitator. So I feel like I've come full circle or put all the blocks together or something.
Yeah, I love that. And it's easy to do that when you reflect back, but it's hard to do it when you sort of anticipate and look forward.
Yeah, and I even think back to that first facilitation job, with the university around road safety. And it's only been in the last year really that I've reflected on that and thought, oh, that's what I was doing, or that's what I was meant to be doing, or was that what they thought I was meant to be doing? It wasn't like, oh, now I'm a facilitator. It's just something that I've built over time in a lucky way, I suppose.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, you did allude to teaching, and often we talk about adult learning theory, and it's dramatically different from learning in terms of education and those younger levels. Do you see any similarities between teaching kids and working with adults?
That's a really interesting question. Yeah, I guess one of the big things that we, when you're teaching children, is you're not just teaching the child, it's the whole, you're embracing the whole child, not just what they show up to in a lesson or in a day, their whole lives. You're working with their families. If you're lucky, you're working in a school community. And I think that's very much the same for when someone shows up to a workshop. They bring a whole lot more than just the behaviour or what you see in that moment at that workshop. They are part of a community. Often you're working with them in the context of a team. And so I think that is one of the things that is the same. I think about it, that you're not just looking at what someone's presenting. You're looking at the holistic approach to how to get the best for that person.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point, because I think often, and I know early days in workshop design, I was only thinking about the person in the workshop and what we had to do, as opposed to that kind of like overarching process that you're talking about. How do you kind of weave that into the work that you do?
It's just thinking as you said there, like I remember when I started out facilitating, it's like, it's 10:15, we're meant to be doing X, Y, and Z. Why aren't they doing it yet? Like it almost felt like it was my workshop. Why aren't they doing that? It's really interesting. But I've moved on from there, luckily. I think, how do you weave it in? I think it's about the environment you create before, like the what you do before the workshop first and foremost, like how you create that connection so people feel that they can come and be themselves and participate. And then I think it's helping to give them, and I don't know if this is the right word, agency. It is their workshop, it's their time, in the same way that when you've got 30 children in a classroom, it's their classroom, it's their culture that they're creating, it's their agreements about how they're going to work, and you're trying to support them and get the best out of them, but it's their learning. So I think there's some stuff around that that's very much the same. How do you almost lead from behind? How you're facilitating and you're the one up the front, but actually it's their experience, and actually everyone in that room is probably having a different experience, and that's very much the same as teaching. I think one of the hangovers when I was a teacher, no matter how good that maths lesson was or reading lesson or whatever it was, you knew that at least 10 of those kids didn't really get it. You could always do better. How are you going to do this differently? How are you going to help those children? That there was someone in there that just didn't quite click. And I still have that feeling with a workshop. Even if it goes well and you get great feedback, I know for myself, there's something I could have done better, or was there a different door I could have opened? What's someone sitting with that they haven't been able to say that might have been important? And that, I think, is a hangover from that teaching experience.
Yeah, I think it's a hangover that like I certainly have. Like, you go through feedback and you get 90%, it's amazing. And then you get like something that isn't that great, and you sort of tend to focus on that. I've heard previous facilitators share that as well. I guess, it's something I'm battling, and something I've written about in the book is the accountability has to be shared. Because I think a lot of the time I'd be like, what could I have done differently? What could have and I think that's a healthy approach to this. And then also accepting I can't control how people think. Like, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I think that's something, it's a constant thing, learning what you can take responsibility for and what you can't, because I always think I want people to come and I want them to have a great day. I want them to leave thinking that was a useful use of their time and their effort, and they got something out of it, even if it's not the thing I thought they were going to get out of it. And so, I think I do take on a lot of responsibility for that. But you're absolutely right. It's both of us. It's the person, the structure I'm creating and the environment I'm creating, but it's what they bring and they get out what they put in. It's a hard one. It's a mind game.
It is. It certainly is. So if you're listening and you're feeling that way, you've been validated by Jo and I. We're all a work in progress here.
Yeah. And then there are always those people too that come. There are people that love a workshop, right? They want to sit up the front. They want to talk to you beforehand. They want to find out about what it's like to be a facilitator. They just love workshops. And people that sit there going, I have to be here, or for whatever reason, I don't want to be here. Why? Maybe they've had bad experiences. Maybe they've never been to a workshop before, so they don't know what to expect. And I think you always got to hold the space or help them be in the space, no matter what they're bringing. And I think that's hard too.
Yeah.
You don't know what's going on for people, and you can spend a whole lot of time guessing and getting it wrong. But I think it's important to think about that not everyone brings the same thing. And so therefore, how do we create an experience where people can be themselves and get something out of it, no matter what they've come in with?
Yeah, that's a really great guiding question. Now, I remember in Brisbane, you shared a story about, so often with the workshops that I present, I take away, or I think about workshops I've been to as a participant and what I've learned from that, positive or negative. And you shared an example of, was it a public speaking workshop where something happened? I was wondering if you could share that with our listeners and the lessons.
It was after I come out of teaching, I got into a government department, and they sent, I think just about everyone went on this public speaking course. It's one of the very first things I'd been to. And everyone had to present you took some PowerPoint slides and you stood up to present it, and you got feedback about your presenting style. Everyone kind of sat around and watched. And really early on, a couple of women were sitting there, and they said, oh, look, we're trying to listen to you, but all we can focus on, all we can see is your big blonde hair. And it was just like, oh, like what, you're standing up the front, so you're vulnerable anyway. And everyone looks at you. And I don't remember the trainer saying anything. I mean, I'm sure they probably did, but I just remember feeling so, psychologically unsafe. Just like, what do I do? I'm just being me, And I just remember like kind of clocking out after that, because why would you keep participating if you were as a kind of I felt quite attacked as a person, I guess.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's just reinforced as a facilitator. I would never, ever want anyone to feel like that, or for anyone to be in a workshop and feel that they could say something And sometimes we speak and we don't mean to say, or it comes across the way we don't mean to. And so as a facilitator, I want to make sure we can deal with those situations. But if someone's deliberately trying to be a bit mischievous too, I would never want to create an environment where that was okay. So that how we create safety and how we create a connection together in our workshops really early on, I think is really important to me, because I physically feel it when I talk about that example. It's still with me. It's so
Yeah.
yeah.
And you think, I mean, if you've got participants that have been to workshops, maybe where they've had that experience and they come into yours, like that's what you were talking about earlier, is like, we're not too sure what people bring to these workshops. The brand of workshops sometimes is not strong for certain people.
Yeah.
So,
and you think about, we talk about diversity and inclusion, and my story of feeling unsafe is nothing compared to what some people experience every day. And so, I think better at diversity, we're not as good at inclusion. It's something we're still learning. And so I think that how we start the workshop and how we welcome people and get people's voices in the room and create some sort of agreement, or how we're going to be together for the day or the time we're together, it's all part of that building trust and bringing everyone in. And I think that's so important. That's starting strong, even though some people are like, can we just get on with it? It's like, actually, this bit's really important.
yeah, it is. It's when you get someone sort of there, like you can tell, like they'll do an activity, they finish really quickly, and you're like, okay, we need to move this along, but then you got to consider everyone else. We've been alluding to like the differences between being a first-time facilitator and where you are now in terms of like the growth that you've experienced as well. Something you mentioned is the difference between doing, like so doing the facilitation versus being the facilitator and holding that space. Like, what is the contrast difference? What are your thoughts upon those two sort of, I don't know if they're polarities, but along that continuum?
Yeah, and I think I still scoot along it. I did a course a couple of years ago with group work in Australia, and I remember when I talked about that, I was like, I was really bored with my facilitation. I felt like I was using the same structures and the same tools, and I wanted some more tools in my tool bag. And I remember them saying, well, 80% of facilitation is you. And I was nearly sick. I was like, oh. You mean I've got to work on me to be like, right? But the process of doing that, I think, has changed my facilitation in so many ways. I mean, in one of the tangible ways is I used to turn up with this bag with every resource and everything you could imagine, because, we need the things, because if we've got the things, we can help the people. And I take a lot fewer things with me to workshops now, because it is about how you show up for people. So I still have a structure. I'm still very prepared, but I think that gives me the confidence to then go where people need to go. That's the difference. I think, as I said earlier on, I'd be like, it's 10:15. We should now be doing the best of us activity, but they're still talking about partnerships. Come on, people. Not that obviously, even in my head, I'm thinking, oh, we're not going to get through it all. Whereas now I'm like, okay, this is a really interesting conversation. There's a reason we're spending lots of time on this. Let's talk about that. Let's notice it and work out why that is and what else we want to do with this. And then, work out what comes next if that's appropriate. So I think that's a very different experience for people.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really powerful quote that 80% of facilitation is you. Whoa, that's very profound. And so in terms of like preparing yourself for a facilitation, for a workshop, what are you doing in the lead up to that? Let's talk even like the night before and even on the morning of, like, what's your kind of ritual for pre-workshop?
And I've just finished packing for one for tomorrow, actually. So I'm very prepared. I have a very detailed agenda. I have all of those things. I have my bag out, days before, and I'm gathering all my bits and pieces. The day before, I like to touch base with the manager or whoever's hired me and just make sure they're comfortable and there's no major changes to anything in the team, or are they really clear about what we're doing? One of the things I've started doing, actually, I'm looking to my side because I've started an intention sheet. After a workshop, I've tried to be a bit more disciplined about my reflection, but I want to be more deliberate in how I turn up to the workshop. So I started an intention sheet as well. And so what I think about beforehand, I write down actually is, so how I want to be. So how do I want to show up for this team? The first question is, what do they need from me? But, how do I want to be? Then I think about all the micro skills. So in terms of the skills I've got as a facilitator, what do I really want to aim or lean into deliberately? Do I really want to be noticing things? Do I want to be listening a certain way, validating, normalizing, all those great skills? And then I think about, because I use Clifton strengths, what are the strengths that are going to be most useful for me to use with this group? Are there things I need to use really intelligently? Maybe there's some I need to manage but what's going to help me be my best facilitator self for that group. So when I reflect now, it's not just my reflection on their reflections or how I might, that buzz or the flat that comes after a workshop. It's actually also about how did I show up for this group? And I found that to be a much richer way of thinking about it.
I really love that. I mean, you've mentioned you used deliberate a couple of times in what you were saying. And I know it's pretty important to you, like in terms of the intention and being deliberate in terms of a skill as a leader, but you're bringing that into your facilitation work. Can you talk more about that concept of being deliberative?
Yeah, it's interesting too, because it's first of all, deliberative is not one of my key strengths, but being deliberate. And it's interesting because it's almost like being deliberately not deliberate. If you talk about being and not doing, if you're just being deliberate, you could be deliberately really sticking to your agenda and all of those sorts of things. But for me, it's being really clear about and conscious about how I want to show up for people. That helps me serve them best to get to where they want to be. Yeah. So that's what the thinking about the being is. My intention sheet is not my agenda. I've got that, but this is all about, none of it always says follow the agenda rigidly.
Yeah.
So you say this word at 6 o'clock. Very much about the energy I want to bring and how I can make sure I'm present for the group. So it's a different type of deliberateness.
Yeah, and I love it because I think so different sessions, depending on the context, require different micro skills. Ideation might be important, or the converging ideas might be the most important thing, or just being a good listener might be enough. But it really, So, because I think usually we think about, okay, our facilitator brand and, but it actually will change depending on what's required.
Yes.
For that time, for that group in that moment.
And you don't know until that moment happens. And that's the scary bit. But I think it's, if you can show up and be present of mind enough in yourself, then you can manage those moments in a way that helps the group. And I think earlier in the first time facilitator stuff, when I first started out, there's something automatic that happens in those moments, I think, that can be unhelpful. Like it's if there was conflict or tension or emotion or something wasn't quite going to plan, my whole thing would be, how do I fix this? How do I stop it? How do I make it get back to normal? How do I dull it down so we can get on with it? And, that's still a part of me. I don't love conflict. So there's a part of me that's always going to be there. But for me now, it's about, well, what's happening? How do we name this? How do we notice it as a group? And then how do we work as a group to work out what we do about it? And that's something I'm learning more. And I think, again, that's about me not taking responsibility or assuming what the best solution for this team is. They go back and they're still a team tomorrow. I go back to my home office. Bye. So it's about making sure what we do in the workshop has a beautiful impact way beyond the time they spend with me. And so who am I to take responsibility for that, for them? Yeah.
I resonate with when you're saying that when something goes wrong, it's like our first inclination is, let's just fix it. Let's just try this activity and we'll all move on. And then you also mentioned being present. And I know in some workshops where I felt like it's maybe been an out of a body experience, it's kind of felt like someone else has facilitated it. And I don't know, I don't know if you've had that feeling. And there's other ones where I actually feel like my feet are planted in that.
Yes.
And it's just a different physicality, but I felt more centered and more present versus that whole you think out of body might be good, but it's like, no, I'm not actually in this room. Yeah. Do you have you felt that?
Yeah, I have. And sometimes I'll be at the end of a workshop and like the last session or something, it might have just gone. Sometimes like when you're driving down the road and you're like, how did I get to this bit? Shouldn't admit. But I think there is something that happens where, and sometimes you're in the zone, and so it's not coming from a bad place.
Yeah.
But you're not as present as you could be. You might miss things that are really important for the team. Yeah. And probably no one else notices, but you notice in hindsight, that's a different feeling, as you say, to your feet planted on the ground, and here I am with people. Yeah, it's first time I've sort of like pulled that out and realize that. And you also mentioned in a previous comment, you talked about after the workshop, there's like either the buzz or there's the flat. Yeah.
And it's so interesting because sometimes like maybe the group is buzzing, but then you might feel flat or vice versa, or you're aligned. Like, I know you got your intention sheet now. Is there anything else that you do after a workshop to sort of help you navigate that? Or is it just part of the job?
I've noticed I feel more energized or less flat, maybe is the better way to describe it, after workshops now than I did when I was trying to fix everything and I was trying to be or do everything. I think that's exhausting in hindsight. At the time, I thought that's just what the gig was. I think now that I'm hopefully more present, even when something doesn't go according to plan, at the end of it, I don't feel as exhausted. In fact, it is definitely more energizing. I think because you go with the group energy. And so you're not fighting it, you're actually going with it and with people. So I think there's something really uplifting about that, if that doesn't sound too twee. I haven't got the end of workshop ritual down yet. I think there's something I like staying in the room after everyone's gone and taking everything off the walls and packing up and doing that. There's something cleansing. I don't know, maybe. I love that. And then coming in, unpacking my bag afterwards. Yeah, I really like that. But quite quickly, often we're back, we're getting ready for the one in a couple of days. So there's not a lot of time. So it's something I'd like to get better at, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like, that's the beauty of in-person is you have that sort of ritual, like pulling things down, the commute home where you might listen to some music. It's such a different vibe. And I think I did a podcast about this, but we tend to, everything we do in our workshops is like, we focus right on the start, but we don't really focus on like the cool down so definitely something I need to work on, even with virtual sessions, because like you're off and then you're like back in your home. So you're like, what's the transition, like commute time, just building that into maybe your calendar invite. Jo, do you have any favorite sort of like, I know you mentioned before that it's not about the doing, it's about the being, but I'm curious if you have any sort of favorite go-to activity or an icebreaker that sort of hits the mark when you use it.
Yeah, and we still need things, right? People come and you have to have structure and you have to have ways for them to have the conversation. Favorite icebreaker activities. I really love checking in, giving people time to check in and check out of workshops. So whether it's in small groups or in pairs, and just at the beginning, talking about anything they need to talk about to be able to land well in the session. So I always give them some questions, but also whatever else. It might be they've left a million emails or something's just happened on the way to the session and they just need to be able to talk about that so they can let it go. So I love that check-in, and it's with someone else. And they don't have to share it with the whole group if they don't want to. Like, it's their conversation. I love that as a way of getting people in the room. I love the things where people are moving around dynamically, whether it's, there's the secret handshake one where they come up with a secret handshake and then they answer a question. They're playing music and people pretend not to like the music, but they like the music eventually. And, in that way we're moving. So you're getting rid of all the nervous energy. And plus you're meeting different people and just quickly sharing, creating a little bit of a bond. So I like those types of things for starting a workshop. Yeah, things that start building trust and movement, I think.
Yeah, I'm so happy. Like movement for me is like, and you said it in a way that makes a lot of sense, is like it dissipates that nervous energy. Because like I was saying, I think it was last week in one of the calls, is that it doesn't matter what you do. There's always, whenever you bring people together, there's going to be some awkwardness. Like it's just part of the job. It's navigating.
That's group dynamics, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think the movement kind of unlocks that. Like it, like you said, it kind of dissipates that awkward feeling.
Yeah. So another thing I do, especially my strengths workshops, what I'm looking around for one, is everyone gets their own little pot of Play-Doh. And we use it to create, something that represents our superpower. But again, throughout the workshop, they've got something to play with. Like even if they're sitting down, you're rolling the Play-Doh, you're making something. People have that kinetic, that need to move as they think. And I notice it myself, if I don't have any, I'll have blue tack all over my hand by the end of the day because I'm going like this. So that's a really good cheat for me to have some as well.
Oh, fantastic.
But I think those sorts of things, in colour. Having colour, like I love people to come into the workshop and know, this isn't sitting in front of PowerPoint all day. This is something different. The pens smell, there's colour everywhere, there's some Play-Doh. Like some people are like, what have I come to? But I set a workshop up in an agency that I work a lot with, and I heard someone go past the door and look in and go, coloured pens and paper, Jo Fitz must be here. And I was like, that's the best thing ever.
Love that.
Yeah, it's like, they know me far too well. But I thought that was like, okay, that's a good thing. They know they're coming to something a bit different and a bit fun. And even if we're doing serious things, we can still have fun together.
Yeah, that's a really great personal brand reflection, like in terms of just reflecting like the colour and the dynamic nature. Yeah. I'll get it one day of what you do. You mentioned there before the strength superpower. How would you describe your facilitation superpower? Or are they quite similar, like your strengths and how you bring them into the work that you do?
They do go together really well, but my number one, Clifton Strengths, is restorative. So that's helpful and unhelpful. It's helpful in that I'm drawn towards trying to make things better. I look for things that can be fixed or improved. And so in a team, if there are problems that they want to work through and solve, I'm drawn to that. I'm always drawn to that side, and how can we make it better? The downside of restorative is because you're always looking for problems to solve. I see problems where maybe there's more positives and problems, and that it affects how I look about myself and my own facilitation. You talk about getting the evaluation sheets. I only ever look at the thing that says what could be improved. It doesn't matter what the rest of it says, because that's the rabbit hole I go down.
Yeah.
But and that's about always wanting to be better for the people that you work with. So it does play together. I think my superpower, my friend Brenda coined this ages ago. She reckons being prepared is my superpower. Like, that's how, I cope. So that is why I have detailed agendas and all of the things set up the night before the workshop and things like that. But as I say, what I've learned to do with that then is use that as a basis or a foundation to then go where we need to go. I had a workshop about a year ago now with the team, and we were working on mission and purpose and all those big things, and it just wasn't working. We had the structure and I had the little videos and all the things to do it, and we just weren't nailing it. And I remember saying to them, hey, this isn't working. Like, this just isn't working. What are we missing? Like, there's something here that's not connecting. And we kind of got there in the end. And I remember in the evaluation afterwards, someone said to me, I've never heard a facilitator say, this isn't going well. Like, your honesty was amazing. And I was like, well, that's what we should be doing. It's not easy to do that in the moment, because it's like, I set all this stuff up and it's not working for you. But if I hadn't, we were never going to get anywhere. So I think that's the beauty of, you can be prepared, but there's another side to that if you really want to help people get to where they want to go, because it's what are they prepared for?
Oh, that's very powerful. Yeah. And I'm the same as you. Like, I think for me to get a good night's sleep before a workshop, if I've got everything packed and everything ready, but that gives me this, like you said before, deliberately not deliberate.
Yes.
By being deliberate, I can then be okay with what's to come, because I feel like I've done everything I can to create that, but I'm now open to the possibilities. So it's balancing that certainty versus the uncertainty.
Yeah.
Of what's to come.
Yeah, I'm preparing for a workshop with a leadership team. It's a really small group next week, and I'm looking at the agenda today, and I was like, it'd be really nice if we did get through this a bit quicker, because imagine if they just had some time to ask and talk about anything else that they wanted to that comes. It's a leadership team. They're going to do some things that we're doing together with their teams probably. It'd be really nice just to have some space.
Yeah.
Really early on, that would have been my worst nightmare. It's like, we're going to half an hour. What am I going to do with that half an hour? I've got to entertain them. They have to be smiling and buzzing and chatting the whole time. They can't be quiet and thinking. So that's a real shift.
Yeah, thanks for calling it out. I think you've actually gotten into a lot of our facilitated heads in terms of what we're thinking, like the 30 minutes. I haven't got anything in there. So Jo, what would your advice be for first-time facilitators that are listening in and trying to build their skills?
Yeah, I think, there's no better way to learn than do, is there. Like, you've got to back yourself to do more. And even if it's little ways, like depending on how confident you are and how many opportunities you've got, if it's stepping up and facilitating your team meeting, or trying out some different approaches and those sorts of things that you have lots of opportunities for, I think that builds your confidence. You learn really quickly what works and what doesn't, how you need to be, how you need to explain something in a better way or with different people. So I think doing is great. I think if you can find other facilitators or people who get facilitation as a thing to bounce ideas off, so that when you do have the first facilitation flatty, or you do something for the first time, you've got someone that can help you understand that that's okay and that's normal, and work through it. And we all need people, we all need coaches and mentors and helpers and all those sorts of things. So I think you build your network, give it a go. I think, facilitation is a thing. I think there are courses out there that are so wonderful, and good facilitation coaches and networks and all the beautiful things that you provide as well. It is nice to have the understanding of the discipline so that you can then kind of build on it and make it your own. But you've got to start by understanding the nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah.
So invest in yourself is the other thing, I think.
Yeah. And I think it's a really good point around, even if you aren't getting opportunities to run sort of large group sessions, it's finding opportunities in the day-to-day, and everything really can be facilitative. The second, even with your partner, like which I do sometimes. Trying out some models and things like that in conversations.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think too, like the key to a big part of facilitation is listening, isn't it? It's like we talked about being present. It's about listening and really listening, which is hard. And so the more you can practice that, and that is in one-on-one conversations, it's not necessarily in big groups. You can practice that in lots of ways, and great things come from that skill. So it's find the ways to practice in any way you can.
Yeah. And if people, I mean, just on the notion of listening, if you've enjoyed listening to what Jo has shared today, Jo, where can people find you if they want to reach out and learn more about you and the work that you do?
I am on LinkedIn, Jo Fitzgerald, and also I've got a website, just Jo Fitz Consulting.co.nz. I think I've got that right. I never go to my own website. Yeah, I'm a terrible business person.
You're not.
But I'm sure that's where I'm sure that's what it is. But yeah, mainly LinkedIn, and reach
Amazing.
out. Love to connect with other facilitators. You'll learn so much just through informal contact, I think.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely reach out to Jo. Let her know what you thought, what resonated. I think, like I said earlier, I think you're very tuned into what the thoughts that are going through our minds, and the fact that you've raised that 80% of this work that we do is actually just about how we show up in our energy and all, preparedness and things like that. So thank you so much for being on the show. We'll put a link to everything that you mentioned in the show notes for this one. Always great to chat, Jo. I always have a blast, learn a lot, and have a laugh. So thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been amazing. Thank you.